What's up guys, it's Michael here. In this video, we're going to look at the April's 2023 inflation report. So, the inflation report finally came out and it showed the stats how it's going. Everyone, and especially the stock markets, are anticipating that the inflation is either going to go down or it's probably stay stagnant. And the data itself, like a lot of other people mentioned, it's not 100% concrete because you can't collect data of everyone from every single sector. So first you got to understand is why they're raising interest rates. They're raising interest rates is to curb inflation, meaning is prices of goods are going up while people's income coming in is either stagnant or not matching the pace of what is inflation. A best example is in America, you can look at gasoline prices. Gasoline prices look at back at the year of 2000 and now compare to now. It's a massive fluctuation. Back in like 1995, 1990, gas prices where you can buy gallon gas were under $1, which who knew? But in the same time, you can look at it as people's income back then is very low compared to today. Now, the question is, where is the balance needs to be? And today, the balance is becoming bigger, bigger, and bigger. The gap is getting wider. And first, we're going to look at what has the data has shown. And of course, the data, it's not really reassuring that the data is accurate because when they keep changing the numbers, and it's not small changes, it's big changes in their numbers, and how they collect the data, it's pretty difficult to understand where they are coming from. But at the same time, is you got to understand that at least you have some type of knowledge that's telling you what is the economy doing currently. So first, you have to look at April 2023. The CPI inflation, which is Consumer Price Index. This includes all their food, energy, shelter, medical supplies, clothing, apparel, every single category grouped together. On average, we are currently at 4.9% as of April 2023. So right now, the goal is at 2%. And why is that 2%? Because at 2%, the government finds it is stable enough where it enforces people to grow the economy. So when they borrow money, the government makes money. And when they know that they have to pay back a 2% loan or interest rate, they will try their best to make this business successful. And another good example is why they don't want to keep it at 0% or in negatives. And the best example you would look at is Japan. Japan, they try to keep it as close to 0% as possible. So it worked for a while. All of a sudden, their economy crashed because there was no repercussion when you can borrow money and pay it back basically at no loss or cost to them. Basically, there's no risk. When there's no risk, it doesn't give people a push or the ability to try even harder for that reward. So first, CPI inflation, 4.9%. That includes all the goods and commodities, which we can look at first. Energy sector was on average negative 5.1%, which I can argue is because electricity itself is way more expensive. Electricity, which is considered part of the energy sector, is up 8.4%. Food is currently at 7.7%, and transportation is currently up by 11%. So public transportation itself, which makes sense because it's heavily subsidized, they usually don't make as much money as people walking to the grocery store, biking grocery store, or driving. So public transportation is definitely up higher because if you look at COVID, no one really took public transportation. And if they did take public transportation, they try to charge cheaper, but they can't because if they charge cheaper, then they're going to make less money and they're going to basically foreclose. It's really hard to keep public transportation in America. As I mentioned in my previous videos, that public transportation is basically non-existent in America. If it is, it's really niche. First, they don't really like counting on CPI inflation because they don't want to include energy and food, which makes sense because not everyone eats outside. Everyone uses electricity differently. For example, the state of California boasts about green energy and it passed a bill that literally goes against green energy and at the same time is try to tax people for stuff they don't use. And if you look at like another state for Texas or anywhere else in the East Coast, they do the opposite. And their electricity bill is a lot cheaper compared to California. So that begs the question, how do you calculate what is the inflation for electricity in this case when you have 50 states with 50 different prices? So that is the difficult part, which in general, what they do is they take all the states and they take the average, which is pretty skewed, in my opinion, because let's say that if you are in Texas and you pay for electricity bill in Texas, which electricity has more green energy and they don't tax you to like the next dimension, then you look at California, then you have two different competing prices. So it's really hard to find the inflation on that. So they took the average and the average is 11%. Maybe if you cancel out of states, the number will be lower. What they like to really pick on is the core PCE, which is the core personal consumer expenditures. So instead of looking food and energy, they want to cut that out and look at people's personal expenditures, meaning is what money you spend on. So as this channel, we make video on taxes and how you fill out tax forms. This is where they collect most of their data. Besides doing public surveys, they look at people's tax returns. So basically, they look at what you spend. And when they look at how you spend, they can build a report called a core PCE, core personal consumers expenditures. So they look at what you buy. So if you have bookkeeping or maybe you have records keeping, they can look at from point A to B what goods and services you buy. That goods and services go into the report and lets the economy and the people know, making managing decisions, how's the economy doing and faring. And like you can say this report is really misleading, which makes sense because it's really hard to get concrete data. For example, a lot of people want to avoid taxes, which is legitimate. And you have people who are actually evading taxes, which is illegitimate, which is cause you in prison time. But in that case, it's really hard to get a solid data. But this gives you an idea of how it's going. So the core PCE inflation right now is currently at 4.6%, which is actually pretty close to the CPI inflation, 4.9 and 4.6. This minus food and energy. But not everyone will expect the same level of inflation affecting them. How do you feel it? For example, California will feel inflation more compared to, let's say, Texas. But this really varies again. Like, for example, if you work in an income bracket in, like, let's say, closer to minimum wage, and you live in Texas, then yeah, it won't affect you as much as, say, you're in California, you make minimum wage, and you live in that lower income bracket. That will affect you more because you look at energy and food, which is way more than Texas. If that is that cost difference right there, well, people will feel it more in California compared to they live in Texas. But the overall is what they're trying to do is raise interest rates. Interest rates itself, enacted, was supposed to affect all sectors of economy. But what they don't understand, for example, Jerome Powell, they want to look at the overall data. So right now, they're mainly looking at housing. Housing itself is a major contributor because they think housing prices are going up and up, and they're hoping it'll crash or at least stable out with raising interest rates. Yes, interest rates affect housing prices a lot, but if the federal government raises interest rates, does it affect food a lot? Looking at the yearly report over month by month, it doesn't really affect it as much. For example, if you look at data for the PCE, personal consumer expenditures, from 2020 to now, back in 2020 is pretty close to 0 to 1%. And at this point, right now, we're at 4%. So within that span of 2 years, something happened. For example, the stimulus checks that came in. The stimulus checks that came in really did give a lot of boost in the economy. At the same time, give a lot of money that people didn't know what to do with and just spend it all. So you got an influx of money coming in. You can argue it's a good thing. You can argue it's a bad thing. Personally, myself, I have to say it's somewhere in between because the people who really needed money because they weren't allowed to work. At the same time, you got to keep people alive during the COVID pandemic. So there's a middle ground to be had there. But for inflation, their goal is to get it around 2%. And so far right now, it's slowly getting there. At the same time, it's kind of stagnant, which is the worst case. You do not want inflation to stagnate. That means whatever they're doing is not working. And in that case, which I really hope the next presidential election, when it comes around, maybe it'll change around. Instead of raising interest rates, you can add that as more like a supplement. And mainly to lower inflation, add more productivity. Basically, start giving more incentives to businesses to produce more goods and services. And we have more competition, it'll drive prices down lower. So instead of trying to basically remove people from their jobs and create more unemployment, I think the government should just look at the report they have and see all the factors and all the sectors, because they do have the data. It's not perfect, but that data can let them know what they can allocate their money on, produce more goods and services for that sector to lower down inflation to their target goal. And you can put it in a way, it's like, oh, what happens if they reach the target goal and people start losing their jobs and businesses? Well, I mean, an argument to that is hey, you lower down inflation, but at the same time you raising interest rates, making people lose jobs. At least in this case, that people lose jobs for that cause. At least it produced some good and service. They made their money during that time, and now it produced your desired result, because at least make people more productive. That's the whole goal. Make people more productive and lower inflation. So for this report, right now, currently, we're looking at whether or not they're going to pivot or not, because right now the current interest rates at 5.25%. They raised it by 25 basis points, and Jerome Powell said they're not going to lower it until end of this year. So right now, a lot of people are speculating, debating whether they're going to pause, whether they're going to go down, which is personally I say very unlikely based on inflation right now, or they're going to raise. So mainly there are two options. Personally, I find it mostly they're going to pull. It's either going to stay the same or they're going to raise. In this case, it's too early to tell, but here's the report. And you can go look it up yourself. CPI inflation report from the BLS statistics report, or you can look at the core PCE. Gives you a general idea of how what people are spending and how inflation is going for all sectors of the economy in the United States. That's it for this video. I'll see you guys next time. And I'll be posting one of these videos at least once or twice every month when they release it, because this type of data really helps understand how the economy is doing. And when you see it, you understand why does the government makes these announcements and raise interest rates or try to tighten the economy for these reasons. That's why I find it really interesting. I'll see you guys next time. Please like, share, and subscribe. And see you in my next video.